Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Yeah, it's great to be back.
Today we're going to dive into something that pretty much everybody uses, but maybe doesn't totally understand.
Oh, yeah.
Cars.
Cars.
You've got a podcast episode of common car problems, and then also an article just kind of about how cars work in general.
Perfect.
So we're going to try to equip you all with a little bit of knowledge
Yeah,
about basic car mechanics and maybe some simple troubleshooting.
absolutely.
Just
things that could come in handy.
things that could come in handy someday.
Hopefully not, but if so,
Exactly.
we'll be prepared.
It's funny how we depend on these things so much, but I feel like a lot of people
Oh, so many.
would just be totally lost
Totally.
if something went wrong.
Yeah, a little knowledge can go a long way in making you feel more confident behind the wheel, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, what do you do if your car just won't start?
Oh, gosh.
Luckily, this podcast we have starts with that exact scenario.
Okay.
Like, what do you do if your car won't start?
So they start with the basics.
Okay.
Like just making sure you actually turn the key in the ignition.
Oh my gosh.
Seems obvious.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
How many people forget to check the simplest things first? Totally.
They also talk about listening for the starter motor.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what is a healthy starter motor supposed to sound like?
Like a whirring
Okay.
or a grinding sound.
Okay.
Which means that the engine is at least trying to turn over.
Gotcha.
If you don't hear that sound, it could be the starter motor itself.
Okay, so let's say you turn the key, you hear that whirring, but the engine still won't catch.
Mm-hmm.
What next?
Before you panic,
Okay.
they have a pretty hilarious reminder. Make sure you have gas.
Oh my God.
Apparently, running out of fuel is more common than you might think.
Really? I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a good reminder to check the fuel gauge regularly.
For sure.
But let's say you do have gas and it's still not starting.
Right.
Then the podcast mentions these two things, the spark plug and the starter motor.
Yeah.
You were just talking about the starter motor, but now what about the spark plugs?
So the spark plug is what creates the spark that ignites the fuel in the engine.
Okay.
If your spark plugs are worn out or faulty, then the engine won't be able to fire up.
And so the starter motor is what actually turns the engine over in the first place.
Exactly. It's
Okay.
kind of like the initial push that
Oh.
gets everything going.
It's a pretty ingenious system
Mm-hmm.
when you think about it.
Yeah, and the podcast goes deeper into how a faulty starter motor can make that telltale whirring sound,
Okay.
but still not actually be able to turn the engine over fully.
Oh.
They even give tips on how to test it yourself.
Oh, wow. I never realized you could actually, test these things yourself.
Yeah.
So is there anything you shouldn't do when your car won't start?
They caution against pumping the gas pedal,
Okay.
especially in older cars.
Okay.
You might think it helps, but
Yeah.
you can actually flood the engine by doing that.
Flood the engine. How does that work?
So older cars have what's called a carburetor.
Okay.
It's not as common in newer cars, but it's still good to know about them.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, a carburetor mixes the air and fuel together in the right amounts for the engine to run.
Okay.
Flooding it means you got too much fuel and not enough air,
Oh, I see.
which can prevent it from starting.
Okay, so resist the urge to slam on the gas pedal
Yeah.
if your car's being stubborn.
Exactly.
Sometimes the best approach is to just stay calm and start with those basic checks.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we've covered what to do when your car won't start.
Right.
What about some other common car problems?
Well, the podcast also touches on flat tires,
Uh,
which are pretty much a universal experience for drivers.
oh yeah, for sure.
You know that sinking feeling when you hear that hiss and realize you're stuck on the side of the road?
Ugh, I hate that feeling. It's like the air goes out of your whole day.
Yeah.
But they mentioned something about knowing where your spare tire and jack are located.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that so important?
Because in that stressful situation, you don't want to be frantically searching for those things.
Right.
Knowing where they are ahead of time can save you a lot of time and frustration.
That makes total sense. And sometimes it's not even the actual changing of the tire. That's the problem for me. It's like those plastic covers that hide the wheel nuts.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They actually had a funny anecdote about that.
Oh, really?
One of the hosts was helping someone change a tire, and they couldn't figure out why the wrench wouldn't fit.
Oh, no.
Turned out there was a plastic cap covering the lug nut that they hadn't noticed.
Oh, gosh. It's funny how those little things can trip you up.
Yeah.
That's why I love these kinds of practical tips.
Uh-huh.
It's like having a little cheat sheet for dealing with car trouble.
Totally. And speaking of cheat sheets,
Yeah.
they also have a whole section on how to jumpstart a car.
Oh, gosh.
Have you ever had to do that?
I haven't, thankfully, but I've seen it in movies.
Yeah.
It always looks kind of dangerous.
They break it down step by step and emphasize safety precautions.
Okay.
Like making sure the cars aren't touching,
Right.
connecting the cables in the right order,
Okay.
and avoiding any contact with metal parts while the engines are running.
Okay, so it's more than just connecting the cables and yelling clear.
Right.
I'm learning so much from this podcast.
Me too. It's amazing how much practical information they pack into a single episode.
Yeah.
And it's not even just about fixing things yourself. Sometimes just knowing the basics helps you understand what a mechanic is talking about
Right.
and avoid being taken advantage of.
That's a really good point. Okay, so we've covered some common car problems. Now I'm kind of curious to learn more about how cars actually work.
Well, we have this great article that breaks down car anatomy
Okay.
and explains the basics in a really clear way.
All right.
Why don't we start there?
Sounds good. Let's get under the hood, so to speak.
Literally and figuratively.
Exactly.
Right, let's go.
Okay, so now let's jump into this article about car anatomy.
Okay.
It's amazing how many parts work together to get us from point A to point D.
It really is, and they start with what they call the heart of the car,
Uh-huh.
which is, of course, the engine.
The engine, right, makes sense.
Yeah.
That's where the fuel gets turned into the energy that moves the car.
Exactly. They describe how the engine takes a mixture of air and fuel, compresses it, ignites it with a spark from those spark plugs we were talking about,
Yeah.
and then it uses that force of that explosion to power the wheels.
So the engine is like the powerhouse. What else is essential for a car to move?
Well, you've got the wheels and tires, obviously.
Right.
Those provide the traction and the contact with the road. And the article actually goes into different types of tires and how they affect a car's performance in different conditions.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like you might need different tires for driving in snow versus driving on dry pavement.
That makes sense. I never really thought about how much the tires matter.
Yeah, they make a big difference. And of course, you need a way to control those wheels,
Yeah.
which is where the steering wheel comes in.
The steering wheel, right, and brakes to stop.
Of course, to stop safely, yeah.
It seems so obvious, but I don't actually know how brakes work.
Yeah, so they explain it pretty well here. Basically, when you press the brake pedal, it activates a hydraulic system.
Okay.
That applies pressure to the brake pads, which then clamp down on the brake rotors that are attached to the wheels.
Gotcha.
And that friction is what slows the car down.
It's all about creating friction. Okay.
Pretty much.
What about the dashboard?
The dashboard, oh yeah.
It seems like it's more than just a place to put fuzzy dice.
Yeah, they call it the information hub of the car.
Right.
It gives you all those important readings like speed, fuel level, engine temperature, and of course, warning lights if something's not right.
It's like the car's way of communicating with us.
Exactly.
We're starting to see how all these different parts fit together.
Yeah, and that's not even going into all the complexities of the electrical system, the transmission, the suspension.
Right.
It's really a marvel of engineering when you consider how many systems have to work together seamlessly.
Wow. Yeah, it really is. I feel like I'm getting like a whole new appreciation for my car.
Me too.
So going back to the podcast for a second,
Okay.
they touch on something I found really interesting about driver's education.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
They were talking about how driver's ed is structured differently in various parts of the world.
That's interesting.
And they brought up this example of Ecuador,
Okay.
where they actually teach you about the engine and basic car maintenance
Wow.
as part of the licensing process.
Really?
Yeah, imagine that.
That's fascinating.
They argue that it creates more informed and self-reliant drivers.
I can see that.
Like if you know how to change a tire or jumpstart a battery, you're less likely to be stranded
Right.
if something happens.
Makes sense.
They even said that in some countries, driver's ed includes basic first aid and emergency procedures.
Oh, wow.
I never thought about that, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
You're not just learning how to drive the car, you're learning how to handle situations
Right.
you might encounter on the road.
Makes you wonder if we should be doing more of that here.
Totally.
How many people would know what to do if their battery died?
I don't know.
Or they got a flat tire in a remote area?
Right.
Not many, I'd bet.
Probably not. We could all benefit from a little more practical knowledge when it comes to cars.
I think so.
So what does this all mean for someone who's listening to this deep dive?
Well, hopefully it sparked some curiosity about the world of cars and
Yeah.
maybe even inspired you to learn a little bit more about how your own car works.
At the very least, maybe you'll feel a little less intimidated
Right?
anytime you pop the hood
Yeah.
or hear a weird noise.
Exactly. Knowledge is power.
Yes.
When it comes to cars, a little bit of knowledge can go a long way.
So where do we go from... What are some next steps for someone who wants to keep learning? I mean, there's tons of resources out there, right?
Oh, yeah.
The internet is a treasure trove of information.
It is.
You've got online forums, you've got those how-to videos, even like detailed repair manuals.
Yeah.
If you really want to get hands-on.
You can even find courses and workshops.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that teach basic car maintenance and repair.
Okay.
Some community colleges offer them, and there's also private organizations that specialize in this kind of thing.
That's a great idea. I bet that's probably more helpful than just watching some random YouTube video.
Oh, for sure. Having an experienced instructor guide you through the process and answer your questions can make a big difference.
Yeah.
Plus, you get to actually practice on real cars, which is invaluable.
That's cool. It's kind of like taking driver's ed,
It is. Yeah,
but for car maintenance.
exactly.
So there's like a whole spectrum of ways to learn,
Uh-huh.
depending on how deep you want to dive.
Exactly. You can start by just writing a few articles online, or you can go all in and take a full-blown mechanics course. It all just depends on your interest level and how much time and effort you're willing to invest.
And even if you never plan on actually fixing your own car,
Right.
just having that understanding can be so empowering.
Absolutely. Like we talked about before, it can help you communicate with mechanics more effectively, maybe spot potential problems early on,
Uh-huh.
and even avoid those dreaded upsells at the repair shop.
It's true that peace of mind is priceless, okay?
For sure.
So before we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
let's bring it back to you, the listener.
Mm-hmm.
What's the one thing we hope you take away from this conversation?
I think the biggest takeaway is that learning about your car doesn't have to be intimidating.
Yeah.
It can actually be pretty fun and empowering.
Totally. And it can save you
Yeah.
time, money, a whole lot of frustration in the long run.
100%. So whether you decide to tackle a simple repair yourself or just feel more confident talking to a mechanic,
Yeah.
hopefully this deep dive has given you the knowledge and motivation to take that next step.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us on this automotive adventure.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
We hope you learned something new and that you feel a little more in the driver's seat when it comes to your car.
Until next time, happy driving.
See ya.